I'm going to ask Steve a bunch of questions, some about the book, and then others, because he's been working for so long, on and off, I thought it'd be interesting to mix in a handful of job interview questions. I Googled job interview questions and found an article called 31 Most Common Interview Questions. And in the book, Steve talks about averaging 10 interviews a year, which when you think about it, it's like, fuck, that's horrifying. Like, I know how you are. It must have been nerve-wracking. So we're going to do that. I figured he's got material, so let's see what happens. I hope so, too. You've done 10 a year. You got to have something for me here.
Yeah, but a lot of those jobs I didn't want, so I had to fill a quota. When you're on unemployment, you got to go to 3 of those a week. So
wow. Work in the system.
I may have taken a dive a few times.
Trump would be so upset. You're the blight of America, Steve. Thank you. So now for the disappointing part, your debut collection of essays. I know there are writers here in the audience. Obviously, you talked about your experience kind of growing up at Hugo House, and just wondered if you could talk a bit about what it was like going through the publishing process for the first time. I know it's not like, Stephen King has got 100 books. This is a new thing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I kind of lucked out because I was working on the project and hadn't made a proposal yet, and the plan was once the book was done, then I would write a proposal. But this editor, Jesse, wish I could remember his last name, but he had read my piece in Salon, which led him to my piece in the Weeklings, and liked it and contacted me. And he was working for Random House at the time and was like, I want to work on this book. Let me see your proposal. Let me talk to your agent. I was like, don't have either of those. So put all that together, got an agent, did a proposal, and then he brought it to his bosses and they rejected it. But that had all happened, so then now I had a proposal and an agent, and then so that's when we started moving on. I always kind of thought I wouldn't write a proposal until the book was complete, but because that happened, I ended up, the book was probably 50% written and 50% ideas at that time. And then my agent, when he submitted it, the first round, all rejections, and then the second round is when it got picked up.
So how did Skyhorse come into play? That's the publisher, Skyhorse.
They made an offer, and then because they're fairly big and put out a lot of books, I was worried that I would get ignored, and my agent and I had to talk about going for a round 3 with the indie publishers, and besides like the cool street cred of being on an indie publisher, there wouldn't have been anything they could have offered me that Skyhorse didn't. And I'll take it. I never thought I would make any money, so to me, it was all about the contract. I didn't really care. Well, I cared, but there was no thought that I was like, oh, we should try to hold out and get more money. I was like, let's just do this.
So you sold the book and then kept working on it after that?
Yeah, so when I signed the contract, I had 4 months maybe, or about 5 months. So I had it finished in those first 2, sent it to my agent, some readers who gave me great feedback, spent a month revising, then sent it to Skyhorse, and then they did another edit and gave it back to me, which was surprisingly not a lot. I was expecting that it was going to be covered with change this, take that out, but surprisingly it wasn't. Which at first made me think, like, did they actually read this?
So first job interview question, the classic, strengths and weaknesses. What are 3 of your strengths and 3 of your weaknesses, Stephen?
In the job environment?
In life.
I'll stick with the job environment. I'm not a complainer. Give me, just as long as there's a task, I'll do it. If I know what the goal is, I'll do that task, and I won't complain about it. I'll talk shit later behind your back, but I won't complain. I show up on time. I rarely take sick days, even when I'm super hungover. I smell nice.
Definite strength. And then the weaknesses?
Constantly anxious, feel overwhelmed if I have to do more than 2 things at one time. Show up to work hungover.
I hope you never said those in job interviews.
I think my boss is sitting back there. We'll see if I still have a job.
Are you calling in sick tomorrow then?
When I do know I'm gonna be hungover, I'll give you 2 weeks advance notice. I already put in for that.
Speaking of drinking, the other night we were at the bar talking about the book, and there was something that we were talking about that I was too drunk at the time to really process, but now that I'm sober, I'm hoping, soberish, I'm hoping that I'll actually remember it. So we were talking about how the book has been marketed as a voice of the millennial generation, but you actually identify more as Gen X. People our age, you were born in 1980, I was born in 1981. We're sort of on the cusp between each generation. So I'm curious if you could talk a bit about what about your book or your character in the book is Gen X, and what about it is millennial?
Well, I don't like either of those labels, because I don't really identify with either. But the whole thing with the book started, and it was my mistake, because Now for the Disappointing Part was, that was the title, and then with the editor I was just like throwing all these different subtitles, and at one point, I don't even remember doing it, Millennial was in there, and he was like, "That's it." I was like, "Oh shit, what did I do?" So they really wanted, like, instead of Pseudo-Adult, they wanted it to be Millennial. And that's, I guess, a good thing about Skyhorse, because it took about a week of fighting, but I was able to get that out. But as far as millennials just getting fucked over by baby boomers and not having the opportunities they were promised in college, I relate to that. And then as far as Gen X, Gen X, just like, whenever I think of Gen X, I just think of Beck's song Loser.
Yeah.
I guess I relate to that. I have low self-esteem, so maybe that's why. It's like millennials have super high self-esteem because their parents told them they were great, and Gen Xers have really low self-esteem, and I guess I'm right in the middle. It depends on what day it is.
Average self-esteem.
Yeah. No. It just depends on what day it is.
I got you.
It could be, super low or average.
How do you feel right now?
Pretty good.
Good. How are you going to feel tomorrow?
Hungover.
So another interview question, and this is kind of fitting knowing that your boss is here. How would your boss and coworkers describe you?
That's a tough one. Probably quiet. I probably get that a lot. Not the best, not the strongest speller in the world. And I think overall nice guy. Being the one Canadian on my team, I get picked on a lot, but it's fun. But yeah, they'd probably say I'm shy and bad speller. Sometimes I don't know where to put commas.
You talk about that in Greatest Gig Ever, right? That's the last essay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're horrible spelling.
I'm not a horrible speller as such as I make some off. When I do make a mistake, it's bad. It's so far off that spell check's like, not sure what you were going for.
Do you feel like you've become a better speller since you started the show?
Yes. I also know how to use ellipses correctly now. Yeah. Well, part of my job requires me writing in front of a group of people who are all like editors that know every rule ever existed. So it puts a lot of pressure on you to make sure you spell, you use the right effect, which is still iffy on that one.
What is the biggest fuck up that you can think of?
Well, most recently, I honestly didn't know this, but we were talking about like hot cocoa. There's an ant in that word. I didn't know that.
COCOA.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, where I work, there's a coffee machine that has a button that says cocoa, and every time I walk in there, I don't know if anybody knows that awful song, I'm in love with the cocoa. I sing that song in my head every time I look at that button. I had no idea there was an A there. Must have ignored that. Oh, wow.
Learn something tonight. So in the book, your parents, who are here tonight, are sort of a guiding light, especially your dad, who's got this solid work ethic while you quit everything until you find something you don't want to quit, quote. There's one essay, My Father's Quiz, where you write about how your dad taught you to ask yourself 2 questions when you're facing an uncertainty with the job. Does it make you happy, or does it make you money? And then later in a different essay, you guys get matching maple leaf tattoos. You want to show? It's pretty sick. Which your mother obviously disapproves of.
Not disapprove, but...
A Canadian disapproval.
Yeah.
Where did I go when you got them?
LA Bay Bucks.
They're selling Steve's book here this evening if you'd like to buy it. So has your father ever given you any advice where you were like, nah, Dad, terrible idea?
Never a terrible idea. But the one thing, especially with work and jobs, and something that my dad has totally succeeded at, and I think probably my brother and sister do it as well, is like when you're ever faced with a tough issue or problem at work, and even when it's like one of those situations where I've gone over and I'm like, there's no way to solve this problem, my dad usually, because he's already done it, and he'll have an answer. But no, not really any bad advice. I don't know. No. It's all excellent.
I'm changing the will.
What a good son. What about moments where the advice just didn't seem like, how do I want to put this? Where you felt like it was right, but you couldn't do it, in relation to jobs at least?
Well, there were a lot of times when I was going into job interviews where I knew I didn't want the job, and kind of let my dad know that I wasn't going to be trying as hard as I could. And he was, because his advice was always, get the job, you can quit later. But I tend to not wait till a job makes me quit. So I don't want the job, I'll temp because then they kick me out. So when it was a full-time job, I would usually try to take a dive, but my dad's suggestion would always be, just get the job, do it for a year, and find something better.
That attitude is also a metaphor for the relationships in the book, too.
What a secret.
You could say that.
Yeah. You asked me to ask you about this by text, but then we couldn't figure out how to phrase the question, so I'm just going to bring it up now.
Well, it's just there's, when there's a theme through a book, you hope people will notice it when you don't call it out, but it's, the way it's inappropriate to compare relationships and temp jobs, but it was kind of waiting for the person in the relationship to be like, this contract's up. you gotta take your 3 months or 6 months, and then maybe we'll talk again. But yeah, there's definitely similarities to that. But that's been my whole life because I moved around a lot, and I was always in somewhat of a comfortable situation that I didn't want to necessarily leave. And then my dad's job would move, so I would move and just go along with it. So it didn't let me say no.
I feel like this has become therapy now. That's how Steve and I roll. So another question from 31 most common interview questions. If you were an animal, which one would you want to be? This is a real interview question. I've never gotten it before, but maybe you have.
No, I've done a lot of interviews. I've never got that one. I would probably say I don't want this job and walk out. I don't want to work for that person.
You could say you're a dog because you're a barker.
Good advice from Dad right there. You're going to take your dad's advice on that one?
Yeah, I've never thought about what animal I would be, but the joke would be like Canadian moose or something, you know. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, let's go with the dog. So what does success mean to you as a writer?
That's a tough question because that's a question I like to ask other people. I don't think I'll ever be in a situation where I'll feel like I'm successful as a writer, because there's always something more to do or something better to do. But I think being happy with what I'm working on and regularly working, I think that's success. Like, before the book actually was published, the process of writing it to me felt successful because I was always, I did it when I was supposed to, and I met all the goals that I was setting for myself, and so that's success. I since the book's come out, I haven't stopped writing, so I guess that's success.
What are you working on now?
A couple essays that will probably never go anywhere, and outlining a possible novel, novella, something, which is, once I have a little more time, and hopefully, I don't know if Jane Hodges is still here, I'm going to go to mineral school with a weekend and map that whole thing out.
What are the essays about that won't go anywhere?
Running a marathon. So while the last stages of writing the book, I was training for a marathon to run with my brother and writing the book. And of course, everybody's heard the cliche, writing a book is like running a marathon. And actually doing both at the same time was like, that is not true. The thing is, running a marathon is a very easy, you do this, if you follow these steps and these rules and you're healthy, you'll be able to run a marathon. There's no thing like that for writing a book. You can write every day and write a shitty book, or, so I was trying to write an essay about both of those, and it'll probably just sit on my hard drive for a year, and then I'll have to come back to it. I don't know. I've mainly been writing fiction just because I'm sick of writing in my own voice, and it's fun to pick up other people's voices and write in a voice that has completely not my own.
All right, last question. So in the book, you make a lot of pop culture references, Biggie, Sir Mix-a-Lot, the Beach Boys, and then it seems like every other chapter you're sitting alone watching Seinfeld reruns, like a marathon of Seinfeld reruns. Favorite Seinfeld episode?
the one where they go to the Hamptons. I can. Like now that I've seen every episode so many times, there's certain ones where I'm like, I can't watch that one. But that Hamptons one, I think is like brilliant, and I can watch that one. That one will always make me laugh, especially the part. This like will. I can be in like the worst mood if I think about this, but the time when. So George is, girls topless and everybody sees her butt George, and then they're talking about it, and Kramer's line is like, oh, maybe she's trying to create a buzz. Every time I hear that line, I lose it. But yeah, that's probably my favorite episode.
Second favorite? I'm hoping you name mine. That's kind of what I'm trying to That's okay.
It's been a while. I cut off cable a while ago, so now I don't like. The only reason I watched Seinfeld because it was comforting that I could put on at 5 o'clock, and then just like have it on. But now that I don't have a TV, that I can just do that. I don't watch as much. But I think everybody thinks the last 2 episodes are a lot worse than they really are. I actually really like them.
Sort of how it is with endings to anything.
Yeah, well, yeah, I thought they were perfect. They ended at the right time, and there was probably about 10,000 words that got cut out of this book because I didn't want there to ever be a time when the reader was bored and would have a reason to put it down. Seinfeld did that.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue then. So that's all the questions I got for Steve. Does anybody have any questions for Steve? Any questions? Nothing?
I do.
Yes?
I absolutely loved the book. And going through and reading about all of the jobs that you didn't like, most of which you completely explained why you didn't like them, and kind of living some of that with you along the way. In the last chapter, you talk about this job. After 20 years of jobs you didn't like. It's about the ending. What is so different or so magical? Like, what is it that took the writer and the creative who never wanted to be in an office and made the office this magical place?
Well, because being creative and a writer is appreciated in this job, as well as it's not like my role is not something 10 other people are also doing, so it gives it some sort of like more value. Like it's like a lot of those Amazon jobs, if I just didn't show up one day, they could call up an agency, they could put another body in there, and nobody would know the difference. But
You're not commoditized.
yes, and plus it's fun, And I also work with a smaller group of people. It's not like I'm on a team of 20 people. And we write creatively, and I write Canadian stuff, which I never thought I would be doing.
Canadian creative writer.
Yeah.
Is anyone telling you to shove anything up your ass at this new job?
Not once.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, I think we have your answer right there. Oh, your boss is here after all. Any other questions? Yes.
Are you still in touch with the coworker that you read about today? And if so, how is she doing?
Actually, I'm not. I've never, since the day she walked out, I have not spoken with her. And that's actually not her real name. I changed her name, but no, I'm not. Hopefully she's doing well.
Yes.
How do you feel like it works having your job and doing your work after work? I mean, if you could just quit outright and work independently and healthy, do you feel like you want that? Or?
Absolutely. Or if my current job could go down to 20 hours a week and then I was independently wealthy, I could probably do that.
I think she was asking you about the balance between writing and work.
Oh, well,
Not just being independent.
I was just wondering if it helps you write to go to work every day.
In a sense, so one thing is I've kept Saturdays very sacred to me for the past like 10 years, and it's been every Saturday morning I wake up, put on, some jazz and make some coffee and write, and I do that all the time, and so, it's times that can be a sacrifice because I don't have, thankfully, like I don't have children or nobody's depending on me to do anything, so it makes it easy. Like this outside of work, I don't have a lot of responsibilities, so I try to write like 2 or 3 days after work and pretty much every Saturday. There were times when I was unemployed for a really long time, and then that's when it would suffer because I would have too much free time and like watch 8 episodes of Seinfeld instead of doing actually work.
Jeff?
So, it's kind of part of this process. You had what seemed like jobs and experiences that you really didn't like, but it obviously turned into something that was really creative. Have you sensed that in life now? Has that changed for you when you see something and it's maybe an obstacle or whatever it is and realize that, oh, maybe I can get something out of this?
I've had that thought, like, oh, this situation, oh, I can write an essay about this later, and it almost never
Doesn't happen.
There's times where it's like I'll be in a weird situation in my head, be like, oh, that's an essay, and then I'll sit down and write it and be like, nah, that one really wasn't. Like that. Yeah, I know it's worthy of an essay if I've told the story like 5 times to my friends. I was like, okay, that's worthy of it.
To piggyback on this question, do you find yourself making poor decisions in life just so you can write about it?
I make poor decisions on my own, but no. Once I knew that this book, I realized that I was writing this book. There were definitely times when I took temp jobs. Like the very last time I worked at Amazon, I knew that I was writing this book and was like, oh, this is going to be an essay. And so it was like taking notes, like at the job, like. Write about this, asshole.
Well, and also, I mean, you had written that piece about Bezos, and just like, how the fuck did they hire you back after that? After you?
Well, it's the agency that in Google, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, I get an email through LinkedIn that says, "Hey, we've got this catalog sellers or what's it called, catalog specialist at Amazon. Do you want it?" If like my LinkedIn profile is what an agent wants. It's like, oh, this guy he can go in there, work until the end of the contract. He doesn't, he seems like he likes these contract jobs because he's been doing them forever. So, they probably do that to like 20 people a day, so they're not Googling me. And as I say in the book, if you Google me, there's first the child murderer, Stephen Barker, before you get to me.
It takes a few pages.
Yeah. I'm not the top hit.
Any other questions? Awesome. Well, we're all done here. I think the drop shadows are going to come up and play.
Yeah, we're not all done here with the drop
Well,
shadows.
you and I are all done here. That's what I meant. Not. They're all going to stay. They're all going to listen to the drop shadows. They're all going to buy Steve's book, which is on sale.
Yep. Yeah. Right.
LA Bay Books. Steve's going to sign them, and he's going to make it all very personal for you. Thank you all for coming. It was good to see you all tonight and support my man here, my friend, Steve Barker.